I got pulled out of school because Dad hated me so much, he wanted me to go into the army.
We're all disgusted.
Conflict
And I'll never forget those days.
You know, the flowers are like the least kind of...
You're bringing up the flowers that we chose as family while we're having an argument about who's the better kid.
Really? Rich of you,
Really
brother.
rich to come in here and tear down our hard work.
My dad is not even an hour cold.
When everything is completely chaotic, how do you keep up, make sense of the madness, and be funny while you're doing it? That's the question I'm going to answer today. I've picked a clip from Smosh that I suspect is going to have a lot of really chaotic energy, very fast moving from one crazy idea 1 second to a totally different but still equally crazy idea the next second. I'm going to watch it live and react, and I think in my head they're probably going to use 2 or 3 just really fundamental techniques that are going to help them chart a path through that madness. I'm Cal Hoffman, and this is Why Is That Funny, the show where we break down the mechanics of comedy by watching and reacting to your favorite clips from online. If you're a return viewer, please subscribe because it makes a huge difference on the back end. And if this is your first time, welcome! We have channel memberships available, we have a Discord server, but enough about all of that. Let's get into it!
Our next game is called Emotional Rollercoaster. 3 players will start a scene organically, and at any point I will ring the bell and I will give you an emotion. It'll be great. Let's get...
That was so impressive because I heard yeah.
And I was like, wait. Hold on. I was like, wait, that didn't sound normal though.
Yeah.
That was so cool.
All right, so just a reminder, you 3 will start the scene organically. I will give you a suggestion, which your suggestion is funeral.
Amazing.
Let's give them an applause.
This is a short form improv game. The difference between long form and short form, which are the 2 main categories that we talk about, is that in long form improv comedy, you're figuring out what makes the scene funny by yourselves as teammates on stage. You'll find some kind of rhythm that then becomes what we call the game of the scene. The game being, we've found your funny thing is you're obsessed with airplanes and you relate everything back to airplanes, and the game becomes finding a rhythm of like, everything's normal, and then we suspect, oh, this next thing is probably going to lead, they're going to find some way to link it to airplanes, and it's building up tension, and you hit that peak, and it gets mentioned, airplanes happens, and we get that release of that tension in the form of laughter. And comedy is all about build-up of tension and release in the form of laughter. That's long-form improv. Short-form improv, that wavelength of like normalcy, build-up, release, back to normalcy, that loop is a lot shorter because we're given a framework for it. We're given a set of rules. In this game, Emotional Rollercoaster, they're going to be stopped every few seconds and given a new contrasting emotion to play with. And because comedy is that tension and release comes primarily in the form of contrast, it makes that loop shorter because we are giving a new contrast all the time, and that's going to be reliable. And the stakes that we perceive as an audience of, oh, the players are going to have to figure that one out. They're going to have to make it funny. Will they succeed in making it funny, or will they fail? That there's no actual failure, because whether they do get it right or they don't, that's going to be joyous and rewarding and funny for us anyway. So it's kind of faux stakes, but that situation makes it a shorter loop in that cycle of grounded, tension, release. And this is almost like a training exercise. You could use this in rehearsals as a team to train commitment to acting and embodying emotion, because the contrast of whatever funny things arise from that is only going to be real contrast that makes us laugh. If that emotion is big, if you're not committed to it, if you don't fully commit to the emotion, you're going to be in a sort of surreal place where it's a little bit like your everyday normal self, but you're saying that you're so distraught and all this stuff. So that's already weird and uncanny. So when the strange thing happens, it's less funny because it's not contrasting from what we understand to be terrified or sad. But because it's going to create a lot of whiplash, things are going to get really crazy in the scene itself, and it runs the huge risk of just becoming overwhelmingly chaotic and not making any sense. And again, to have contrast, it still needs to make sense no matter how much of a fast change and difference and how rapid the change and difference is. You need a through line to chart your way through that. So let's see how they make sense of the chaos.
It's okay.
Thanks. I just, we all knew him so well.
Yeah, it's Dad.
It's Dad. I knew him pretty well.
Yeah.
Hi. You just parked up.
Cousin Bertha.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, isn't it,
Can't believe you came here all the way from the big place of Canada.
big place, yeah.
So big.
Playful.
Yeah, old Unc, what are you gonna do when he
I mean,
croaks?
did you do any card games on the way over?
Yeah, well, I was driving, so I can't really play games while I'm driving.
That'd be dangerous because Dad died in a car accident.
Wait, do you want to say bye to him? Hold on. Bye, Angela!
Wait, can we do the moment when he caught me for smoking weed when I was 12?
Grouchy.
I don't want to really do that bit anymore.
You never want to support my bits.
I don't really know how I feel about
You
you
never want to
guys.
support my bits.
You guys were touching this man. I don't know how I feel about that.
Man? You mean Dad, Cousin Bertha?
This is our dad, Cousin Bertha.
We've already got our first points of contrast that are being given by the conceit of the game, right? Like, as time goes on, I think it's going to be funny just to see them switch from one type of emotion to the next. But we're already getting things that are like, they're contrasting from this funeral setup that we've been given because they're told to be playful. So for them to be meeting and sort of commiserating their family, getting together, sad about the death of a loved one. And then for Angela, her first concern to be, have you played any card games on the way over here? That's silly. And the whole transgression of Tommy like playing with the body, that's an even bigger contrast from the social norms of what we would expect in that situation. There's a whole comedic theory we don't need to get into today, but I will make an essay on soon about what cultural norms are being transgressed upon by the things that are happening there. But the question was, how are they going to make sense of the chaos? And I want to skip right back to the start of this and see what they did literally immediately when they started talking.
It's okay.
Thanks. I just, we all knew him so well.
Yeah, it's Dad.
It's Dad. I knew him pretty well.
It's Dad.
Hi. You just parked up.
Cousin Bertha.
Cousin Bertha.
Yeah, isn't it?
Angela did a terrific job of that, of letting Courtney stay in character and not do the uncanny thing, I guess, of being like, I'm Cousin Bertha, because they would know who that is. It's kind of more natural for Angela to name who that character is, but that also helps Courtney out in that Courtney now has a character. But the first things that they're saying are establishing who they are to each other by saying it's Dad. They're establishing that they are, unless one of them explicitly said, and I'm Mom, or whatever, then they're kind of establishing implicitly that they are siblings. And then Angela's gone, and you're our cousin. And they're looking down. We've been told by the structure of the game that this is a funeral, so they're looking down, talking about him. So they're presumably at the casket, at the funeral. All of this is called your platform. So if you think of the area this performance is happening on, whether it's at a theater, at the back of a bar, or on a TV set like this, if you think of that performance space as a stage itself, it's elevated on stilts, it needs stability for the characters to be able to move around and start doing the crazy things that they're going to do. And if you want to think about the four corners of that being held up, they need to be held up by four key concepts: who you are, where you are, what you're doing, and why. The who is not just your name, but what the relationship is between one another. We've got that these are all family members. One is a slightly removed family member because they're from Canada, and the two are a little bit closer together. You've got the what and the why kind of pretty well baked into the scenario of this, but what if this was less like, maybe they're just at the post office, or they're at a park or something like that. There's a whole range of reasons why people might be there. So you want to establish really quickly early on what those things are. And why does that give you stability? Because when things start becoming crazy, you've got a through line to link back to. You've got defined stuff. You've got a whole bunch of references that you share together. And if things get so insane that your mind starts going blank of where we're going to go next, you can always return to the fact that you're trying to navigate a funeral situation here, and you're trying to navigate familial relationships between you. That's your platform. We got who, what, where, and why. But as things get wilder and the contrasts and emotions that they're given get bigger, how do they keep that interesting on top of the platform? Let's take a look.
You guys were touching this man. I don't know how I feel about that.
Man? You mean Dad, Cousin Bertha?
Yeah, this is our dad, Cousin Bertha.
I just want to highlight that as well, that this is something that can arise out of the fact that we have that platform. Like, even when you have it all established, it's completely normal and honestly a source of where a lot of the comedy comes from, to say the wrong thing, to just make an oopsie. And Court has already forgotten that they're related to the person that's in the casket and called it this man. So we're going to reference that. We have the platform that gives us a link into contrast, because that's established. Right at the top of the scene, we prioritized saying we're all family. So we have a really concrete base to contrast off of when that unusual thing is brought in that you've said this man. And because it's so unusual, I bet that's going to come up later on as well as part of Game of the Scene. We'll get into that. But again, for now, we're going to look at how they keep things interesting, how they keep spicing up the platform.
Okay, sorry I didn't know him as well as you guys because I didn't come out of his...
Courtney!
Say that again.
Say whatever the shit you just said.
Again.
Sorry I didn't come out of his...
Wait, guys, no, stop. We can't do this. We're at a funeral.
Wait, should we close the casket first?
Afraid!
I think we should just close it.
Like, what if he sees us, right?
What if he wakes
It's possible he could wake up. If he wakes up. Whoa. Listen, I'm trying to go to heaven, okay?
Can I
I'll
ask
f
you
my
guys
sister and I'll f my cousin, but I am going to heaven, okay?
Can I ask you guys to go really fast? Were his legs always like that, or did he move?
Cranky.
Jesus, why can't a dead body just stay still? It just feels so...
It's just wrong. It's just wrong.
Okay, so in my opinion, we have our answer here. Let's take a look at some specifics.
Man? You mean Dad, Cousin Bertha?
Yeah, this is our dad, Cousin
We have two
Bertha.
groups.
Okay,
here.
sorry I didn't know him as well as you guys because I didn't come out of his...
Crazy line. We have two groups of characters. We have the siblings and we have the cousin. So we have a character that is slightly removed from the scenario now, and that becomes a trait of theirs. So I know I did mention who as part of that platform, again, who, what, where, and why, but beyond just who you are, what your name and relationship with the other people is, we want to have our traits that define us that wouldn't necessarily be things that we say out loud, but they help us have a kind of pool of things at the top of our mind to pick from. When you're doing improv, you don't want to be thinking really about what the next thing is you're going to say, but stuff will start to surface and be at the top of your mind, and it'll consist of like what references have been made so far, what facts have been established, but also just what kind of feels right when you start to be kind of existing in the body of this character that you've created. And we have Court being established through this kind of thing of, firstly, having driven in from out of town, but that could go either way. Like, they could be besties, always connecting, always, or this direction that has come from adding in the accidental this man stuff, that this is a bit of an outsider, someone that has a different perspective or feels removed from the situation. That brings in the kind of emotional stakes for both them as a kind of outsider, presumably wanting to integrate, and for the siblings as wanting kind of respect for their family, for their dad, and navigating that tension between their group and this kind of outgroup character.
Horny!
Say that again.
I also think, and that's a weird line to make this pause on and say this, but I also kind of think that Tommy is starting to establish himself as the kind of like proactive character here. I don't have better words for that yet, but he seems quite like front-footed, which might lead to this is a funeral, right? So there's presumably someone that is going to be interested in having things move forward and stay on track at the funeral itself.
It just feels so. It's just wrong. It's just wrong.
I'm just. Can we just be done? Okay, can we be done?
I'm also noticing in Angela's delivery, and this is maybe an assumption, this is a bit of an assumption I'm making, but based on a lot of the character archetypes that Angela leans towards, a lot of it is what we would call a kind of low status character archetype. Angela is very often playing that character, even the sort of herself character that you'll see on the podcast or on like the game shows and stuff that they do, that is quite like, no, cut that, or that was stupid, or, you know, kind of playing up this character trait, because again, the Smoshcast, as we see them, even just when they're playing board games, whatever, they're still playing characters. Like Courtney's not out there belching at the Costco, you know. They're playing characters, and so identifying that trait that that plays well for you. So admittedly, this is an assumption I'm making, but I think I'm seeing snatches of Angela gravitating towards a little bit of a more nuanced interpretation of some of these emotions that is kind of informed by those lower status, kind of a slightly more reserved, slightly more kind of almost a little bit playfully standoffish versions of these. So I'm curious to see as we go forward how that works. Now, granted, if you're giving quite a nuanced interpretation of these emotions, then you have at risk of your character getting more vague as more emotions get thrown out there, if a lot of it is being portrayed through the delivery of it itself. But the question initially was, if they've established their platform, who, what, where, why, and they're starting to get bigger contrasts thrown in, how are they going to keep that kind of interesting? I really think we've got our answer here in terms of character. So let's keep an eye on that as we go on. But I now have the question of, what are they going to do about that erosion of character potentially that can happen as bigger contrasts get thrown at them?
I'm just. Can we just be done? Okay, can we be done with this funeral already?
No, okay, stop, guys. Funerals bring out a lot of emotions, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, let's just do
It's
the
normal
eulogy.
to feel all these different emotions at a funeral.
Right,
okay,
right,
so you
okay.
guys need to calm down.
Okay, please do the eulogy.
And do it embarrassed.
You're such a good writer, so
I wrote this.
Please start.
I wrote this yesterday.
just start.
Okay.
Do I look okay?
I love Dada.
Stay embarrassed, except Angela, now you're jealous.
Dada was so good. Dada loved me the most. And I knew that because he told me, he said, son, love you.
We have to leave the church in an hour, so please get through it.
I wrote this, I need to get...
Okay, yeah, it's great. It is carried on, and you know what? Arasha has called it out as well. We got given the embarrassed emotion for everyone, and Angela continued leaning into that, what we were getting the seeds of in the other emotions. We got, I think, in my opinion, a really beautiful kind of cross-section of embarrassed here.
Dada.
You see this?
Just start.
Okay.
You see this? We have Tommy doing the really like traditional kind of interpretation of embarrassed, like shy, sort of reserve. Angela, completely different direction from how I think most of us probably would by reflex interpret embarrassed, which is that like, I'm embarrassed, but I'm covering it up with anger, basically, and impatience and all that kind of thing. And then we have Courtney symbolically, physically in the middle, and being kind of in the middle of that spectrum of emotion, like seeming to just want to Homer Simpson themselves into the backdrop, which is really cool to see that full spectrum there. My question was, how are they going to keep those characters crisp as they start getting eroded potentially by just wild changes between contrasting things? And I think like our answer here is the acting aspect of it. And, you know, we're blessed as viewers of this because these are all actors. Like, they're, at least certainly Courtney and Angela have done a lot of acting, and presumably Tommy has as well. I know Tommy certainly has done a lot of like UCB style improv training, which really, if you're that way inclined, you can leverage into that. But I assume that he's done acting work as well. If there's any great examples of it that people want to send me them. If Tommy is in a video, I will watch it. But if you can understand what your character traits are, then you can start embodying those through the actual physical act of acting. Like Courtney has done some great stuff of this. Like they're really embodying big transformations between these emotions. But I'm seeing a through line of quite a, I know Courtney has aspects of this just in their own personality, but quite this sort of like feels like quite a masculine kind of youthful, this character feels like 19, 20, 21 kind of age to me. And it's really quite interesting how that through line is visible, just like Angela's sort of emotional through line is visible. That character through line is visible through those big changes. So that is how they're maintaining that on top of the who, what, where, why platform. And when Arasha said, and do it embarrassed, I think that is just a great identification of what it was that Angela was already doing. I want to say the role that Arasha's playing here in short form improv, we call it the director. They're just as much a part of the scene as the people on the stage doing the performance. They need to have the comedic timing. They need to have, I mean, she's got flashcards there, which I'm guessing for this game, she probably has a list of options for potential emotions to give, but I am almost certain it won't be like do these in these order, because you want the director to have that great comedic sense of what's going to make a good contrast to A, the previous emotion that was given, but B, just what's naturally arising in the scene and what the characters are doing with how they play it. So I think that was a great choice. I think Arasha did a great job in identifying that. But we can also see from the emotions that are being chosen, we've had jealous, we've had cranky. We're starting to get into a place that's fairly common in short form improv like this, especially when you're being told to be angry at one another. Conflict is super common. So how do we prevent that from just bogging the scene down and making it uncomfortable, stopping things from progressing, stopping it from being funny?
I wrote this, I need to get through all of it, okay?
Of course you have to get through all of it. Like you got to go through school, and I got pulled out. Like you got to go through school, and I got pulled out. I got pulled out of school because Dad hated me so much, he wanted me to go into the army.
We're all disgusted.
Conflict.
And I'll never forget those days.
You know, the flowers are like the least kind of...
You're bringing up the flowers that we chose as family while we're having an argument about who's the better kid.
Really? Rich of you.
Really rich to come in here and tear down our hard work.
My dad is not even an hour cold.
What?
I am disgusted.
You guys stay disgusted? Court, you're frantic.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you guys. I thought it would be, I thought it would be really nice.
This is
Really nice. You know, I'm sorry. There was a lot of coffee out in the lobby, and I took a lot into my body, and I'm trying my best here.
So how is that conflict being managed and kept funny? I think we have our answers in two parts. I think one part is one of these fundamentals that we've already talked about, and the other part is the third one that I thought might come up in this. Firstly, the platform, always the platform. Who, what, where, and why. We had an ugly emotion come up. Disgust.
We're all disgusted.
And I'll never forget those days.
You know, the flowers are like the least kind of...
So we have the platform being used in the fact that we're here at a funeral. So that is something to pull from. We're not just going to be randomly disgusted at this person's shoes or whatever, because that is going to tear us away from... You might be able to do that in relation to your character traits, but it's pulling us into just a randomly conflicting kind of place. And we have the platform being used again here.
Bringing up the flowers that we chose as family while we're having an argument about who's the better kid.
That's great. That's great use of character and platform. They're still in the environment that they're doing, but they're talking about their relationship, who they are to one another. So Tommy's using that kind of as a way of prioritizing sort of what is important to be discussed between those characters in that scene, the relationship, the who you are to one another. And again, inherently that highlights the contrast between the thing that you've just said about flowers and the fact that, like, that's funny if your cousins who are siblings are having this horrible argument about being sent to the army and your dad not liking you, and you're just stepping through the middle of their argument to talk about the flowers. That's funny. That's crazy. So that's the first part, but I think the second part
Really? Rich of you.
Really
brother.
rich.
is going to start here.
And tear down our hard work.
My dad is not even an hour cold.
Yeah. And that even got a cut away to Chance, and I'll tell you why they cut to Chance's face.
My dad is not even an hour cold.
What? What we've had here through Chance is a framing. So we are getting into the territory of game of the scene. I don't know about Courtney, but Tommy and Angela, we have two UCB, Upright Citizens Brigade School trained improvisers. This is a particular approach to improv that is a way of making sketch comedy on the spot. It's long form improv, so we don't have these kinds of game rules like Emotional Rollercoaster to guide us. But like I said at the very start of the video, we're creating our own version of the game by, in this case, organically letting a scene run and then eventually someone puts their foot in their mouth. Courtney did that earlier on with the case of this man being their uncle. But this one is such a big thing and was also delivered in such an over-the-top manner that is unavoidable. Like, how crazy is it? Like, they're at a funeral, they're around the casket, they're talking, they're mourning. Court's character Bertha has driven in from the big place of Canada. And that has all happened in the last hour. The dad is just cold for an hour. That's mental. And what we would do in UCB, if they were doing a proper UCB scene, one of the characters would point out how crazy that is. We've got to stand in for this. We call it framing. We've got to stand in for it in the form of Chance here that has been cut to as an audience member, but literally saying what? That is a proxy for, if you think of comedy like a balloon, right? And everything that you're doing is building in tension. It's blowing up, expanding this balloon. So we start with just the basics of the scene, the platform, who, what, where, why. That's blowing that up a little bit. We start to add character and emotional stakes. That's blowing it up a bit further. When unusual things like my dad is just an hour cold get added in, that's expanded to its very limit here. Like that latex or whatever balloons are made of, I don't know, stuff is stretched to its limit. And all we need is a pinprick to come along and stab into that balloon and it'll explode and release all of that tension. And that pinprick in this kind of framing that we call it, it comes in the form of just saying that crazy thing that you just said or did was crazy. It says to the audience, did you see that crazy thing? That was crazy, which allows the audience to feel, oh yeah, it wasn't just me that noticed it. And we don't need to worry that if we just laugh and release that tension that we're going to miss something else. It's a pinpointing of that moment in time so that we can release that and feel the laughter from that. And that is so big that given their training as UCB performers, I'm pretty certain that is going to become incorporated as either the game of the scene within the short form loop of changing emotions, or it at least will be referenced once or twice more. And that is a great way to work around that conflict. It came up organically. It's what happens when you're free associating and you're full of emotion and you're moving quite fast like Angela was. But the question was, how are they going to stop it from just being an argument for argument's sake where things get just tense and slow down? It's by allowing yourself to still notice and celebrate and frame and point out the unusual things that happen, create games of the scene within the game that you're already playing. That is how you work around that conflict. The downside of that can be things start getting crazy. We head into crazy town, we call it, where suddenly you don't have enough contrast anymore because everything is crazy. And if everything is crazy, then nothing is crazy, you know? We've been screaming for a good long while now in this scene. So how do we handle keeping things away from just Crazy Town, where us as an audience, we disconnect? Let's see.
You know, I'm sorry. There was a lot of coffee out in the lobby, and I took a lot into my body, and I'm trying my best here. I'm sorry.
Mini pause. We're getting some grounding. We're touching back. If we're on this part of the cycle where things are really wild, we're touching back down a little bit towards justification. Even if it's flimsy justification, it's something that's taking us back down to normalcy. Let's see if there's some more of that.
Sorry, I'm gonna say it. This is classic Bertha.
It's classic Bertha.
And then it gets all frantic. What do you mean?
You come in here, you tear our shit apart, and then you put your hands to your sides and flip them around.
I'm just trying to be a good guy. I'm just trying to be a good little guy.
Get in there with him.
Get in there! I can't. I'm so scared. I'm so scared right now.
Wow. Again, just a mini pause. Did you notice how Angela linked that back into character? So we got classic Bertha. That's not platform exactly. It's Bertha is one of the Who's, but it is a character trait that we're using to ground things again, like as part of the justification once more. Your character always does this. That gives Courtney something else to play with, or the other two something else to play with. That other similar stuff could be classic Bertha. We'll keep going.
Get in there with him.
Get in there! I can't. I'm so scared. I'm so scared right now.
Court, now you're skeptical.
You know, it, yeah. You know what? I'm gonna call your bluff. I'm gonna get in there with old Poppy. I don't even think you're gonna care.
What?
Whatever.
Wait, listen.
Whatever.
Guys, this day's been crazy.
Yeah.
A second ago, we were gonna each other.
I don't even think he's dead. I don't even think
You don't
this
think he's
guy's
dead?
No, I don't know about
You don't
that.
think Dad's dead? He hasn't moved in an hour.
Yeah, okay, we're getting just more of those fundamentals. We had all three in there all at once. We had the platform. We're reminded once again that we're at a funeral and we're bringing the casket into play. We have the character aspect of the classic Bertha and the interplay between the characters. And we had the game of the scene, the get in there. I think in particular, the character aspect of Bertha, in Courtney's acting, once again, that brilliant kind of like what I feel is quite a masculine energy that they bring to that character, that's showing through beautifully. That skeptical characterization is practically the horny characterization. But do you see how the question was, if it's heading into Crazy Town and things are escalating quite clearly, how do you keep that structured in a way that we still care about it and it makes sense to us and it makes sense to them? They don't completely lose track and lose hope as performers. It is using that platform, like, get in there into the casket where the body is. That's wild. But it's kind of fundamentally linked to that platform. The fact that we're here for a funeral and the character aspect of it's us versus you. You're the outsider and we want you to be respectful, be part. I mean, that's the grounding, the justification for it. It doesn't matter that it's broken logic, that how does getting into a casket show respect for the dead? It doesn't, but it's logic nonetheless. So that gives it kind of a grounded basis to then contrast weirdness off of. But that platform use and that characterization on all of their parts and the traits that they've established for themselves. Tommy is the slightly more directed one. Court is the outsider one. Angela is the sort of reserved, slightly antagonistic one. That's keeping us so anchored that we can then play with the unusual just developments of the scene and the game of the scene of my dad hasn't been cold for an hour. It's great. All of it's coming together. That being said, they have to land this plane now. Like, it is at heights and it only seems to be escalating further. So how do we keep that together and finish things in a cohesive, coherent way?
I don't even think this guy's dead. No, I don't know.
Oh, did you
about
see
that.
Court called him this guy again as well? Bringing back, it was much less framed and it's a much smaller, blink and you would miss that little reference, but that's still another game of the scene that Court had created for themselves right up top.
No, I don't know about that.
You don't think Dad's dead? He hasn't moved in an hour.
An hour.
You guys are all marvelous.
Oh.
I think at the end of the day, we've been up and down, and today has been crazy for all of us.
Just, okay, I think that Arasha has done a great thing here. I just want to timestamp saying that. I'll explain it after we see whatever we're about to see here, but I think that this is the landing of the plane, what she's done here.
You guys are all marvelous.
Oh.
I think at the end of the day, we've been up and down, and today has been crazy
Yeah.
for all of us.
And I think we all have to remember that it's up to us to save this city.
Yes.
Marvel.
Dad, get up!
Wait, let me jumpstart his heart.
Dad!
Dad!
I'm alive.
Iron Man is alive!
You're a disappointment.
Yeah, it worked. That was great. Okay, so what Arasha did, she gave something that is not an emotion.
You guys are all marvelous.
Marvelous, that's crazy. That's an
I
adjective,
think at the end
Arasha.
of the day, we've been up.
But we get an exploration here. We've got 3 different things happening at once on stage, which is building us in a peak of tension as audience members. Because again, remember right from the very start of this, the stakes that we perceive as audience members of, are they going to succeed or are they going to fail at this? Or are they going to surprise us by doing something totally different where we wouldn't have any idea what we would do? That's lingering over this whole thing, creating that short form loop. So we now see 3 different approaches to how that marvelous is being executed. Because this is improv. You have to do something. You can't be like, what? I don't know what that is. You know the number of times you're doing improv and you get like a suggestion of a word and you don't know what the word is? That doesn't happen to me, but it happens to lots of people, and you have to just figure something out. You have to make it work. What is Angela doing? Where might I hear marvelous? Oh, period dramas, Downton Abbey, that kind of thing. She's become suddenly flamboyant a little bit and elegant, and the editing, the soundtrack that is put underneath it is kind of reinforcing that.
And down, and today has been crazy.
What's Court doing? Court's face, Court gave the biggest sort of indication when Arasha said marvelous of like, what? Court's starting to mirror. Court's starting to move like Angela.
Yeah.
For all of us.
And I think we all
beautiful.
have to remember that it's up to us to save this city.
Tommy does this.
Yes.
Look, did you see that?
Down,
Keep
and
watching
today has
Courtney.
been crazy.
Yeah.
For all of us.
And I think we all have to remember that it's up to us to save this city.
Yes.
Oh, look at that. That is so great. So talk about mirroring. Court's gone from mirroring Angela to mirroring Tommy. So Angela and Tommy have both made quick decisions about what they want to do. Court hasn't made a decision about what marvelous means to them, but has made a decision about how to handle that still, which is to mirror. And this is great in this kind of situation. It's great in the start of a scene where you don't know where you're supposed to be or who you're supposed to be or what you're supposed to be doing, but your scene partner has started doing something, so you just start doing a similar kind of action or holding a similar kind of energy to you. That is such a great way of getting you in a closer mindset. And take a look at, like, Tommy's hand is barely above his head and Courtney's is already at their shoulder. So he's like fist bumping or doing this kind of like heading towards this kind of superhero power pose, but he's not even close to being all the way up. And Court's hand is just behind. That only happens if you are so focusedly in mirror mode. If you're an experienced improviser, you can switch quickly in and out of being in mirroring mode, and you can do it relatively unconsciously as well. But if you're not in mirroring mode, you're not going to, if Court had kind of decided, here's the specific route I'm going to take through this with my own interpretation of marvelous, then that wouldn't be happening. But it is no less of a valid way. In fact, it's a super effective way of making it feel like to the audience you have made a strong choice. I want to word that really carefully. Mirroring is a really strong choice, but you have like originated the choice of what that version of marvelous means, and that you're working as a team and everything is so in sync. That I'm making a huge deal out of a fist bump or a power pose, but That is very, very cool to see. And the question was, how are we landing that plane? And I think raising the stakes for the audience through an unusual instruction like marvelous is a huge part of that. Starting to come together as a team through things like the mirroring and through things like we have to work together to save the city, even though that's absurd, that's part of that. The save the city thing is also heightening the energy. And what we're looking for here basically is to finish on a high, and the audience will release the leftover tension that they have upon that happening. Even if nothing funny really happened, even if it hadn't been a little bit of a build-up, you have some leftover tension still in you, so a bit of a laugh still happens, almost always. But what we're looking for ideally is the biggest amount of built-up tension possible that's left to release. So we're doing all of these things to heighten the stakes as us watching, to heighten the intensity of strange things that's happening, to heighten the emotional energy like Tommy is leading us towards. And then all you need is a button, some sort of slightly funny line. You don't need anything sophisticated, anything clever. A callback will do. So what we're going to do here is keep building up that energy until literally some small thing that is enough to overinflate that balloon that's being filled up with, we're getting the weird marvelous, we've got energy of frivolity, we've got Marvel superhero energy, we've got the song, we've got the resurrection. Oh, it's so at the edge. We just need something to overinflate, which is the other way that the balloon bursts, and then we'll have our ending. Do people? I wouldn't know what the Marvel song is, by the way. How do you sing that?
Dad, get up! Dad!
Wait, let me jumpstart
Oh
his
no.
heart.
Dad!
I'm alive.
Iron Man is alive.
have-
You're a disappointment.
And
Great, simple. Back to the platform of what's been established. Platform, character, game of the scene, all wrapped up in that one line. You're a disappointment. Ah, it's beautiful. And that was an intensely chaotic scene, but they navigated a line through that using the platform of who, what, where, why, the character traits, the wants and needs, and the acting out of the characters, and the game of the scene of those recurring through lines through it. That is how you navigate the chaos. What else did you spot in that? What do you think I missed from that? Or am I totally wrong? Do you have a different interpretation? Again, if you liked the video, especially if you're a recurring viewer, please subscribe. It does a huge difference to how I get things out to people. And we have channel memberships as well. You can get early access. You can join the Discord. I'll see you soon. And until next time, keep laughing.